Welcome to Rising Woman Leaders. I'm your host, Meredith Ram, and I believe the time has come for women to share their gifts, their voice, and their stories. I love seeing women spiritually and financially empowered, thriving in their life's work, and doing what they love every day. I've gathered a community of women living their dreams to tell us their stories and inspire us to step into more courage, self-love, and feminine leadership. If you like this podcast, follow me on Instagram at Rising Woman Leaders and sign up for email updates at risingwomanleaders.com. Now get cozy with a journal and a cup of tea. I hope you enjoy today's show. I'm here today with June Marissa Cowsith, also known as Jumakae. She is a multidisciplinary artist, storytelling coach, and wellness consultant based in Long Beach, California. She has conducted spoken word workshops and mural projects with various youth groups and has facilitated theater skills with community members addressing local issues from wage theft to environmental racism. As a keynote speaker, she has motivated crowds through her original spoken and word poetry in high schools, college campuses, and various nonprofit groups throughout California. Through her additional practice as a wellness consultant called Green Tara Guidance, she's a 200-hour registered yoga teacher trained to work with survivors of sexual trauma and a professionally certified transformational life coach. With her passion for the arts and somatic learning, she holds self-care and storytelling workshops for organizations and individuals to become more comfortable with their mind and body. Welcome, Jumakae.
Thank you so much, Meredith. It's such a joy to finally share space with you.
Yeah, I'm so glad we got connected through Instagram, and just that I love seeing women who are sharing their stories and seeing their stories as a source of empowerment and helping other people to connect with that. So we have a lot to cover today, but I think where I'd like to start is, like you mentioned Saturn return, and you mentioned, I read a little bit of your bio on your website about this real transition time of, it sounded like you were working at a rape crisis hotline, supporting people who had gone through sexual trauma. And at one point, I believe it was that job that your boss just like let you go. And then a big transition happened. So could you tell us about that time of your life? How long ago was that? What led you to be working at that job, and then kind of the journey to leaving it?
Yeah. So let go is a very kind way of saying it. Quite honestly, I was fired, but now I like to reframe that to I was freed. And I am so grateful for that experience, because prior to that, I was a working artist. I was actually on tour with a reggae band in Thailand, which is my roots. It was my own exploration of my own motherland. And I was doing spoken word workshops, and I was also doing community organizing, but more on my own time. And so I prayed to be in a position where I could have stable income, work within a social justice context, and also work within my own community. And I achieved that dream when I was 28 years old, my very first full-time job, as opposed to stitching together multiple gigs. And had it not been for that experience, I would have never known what it was like working from the inside the nonprofit industrial complex. And I am so grateful for that, because today I have a better understanding of the workload that so many people carry doing this kind of direct service work. So many people who work within these industries, like myself, came from trauma, come from personal experience, and we go to school, we get bombarded with so much information that so many of us have forgotten what it's like to be at home in our bodies. And many of us have never even had that chance to understand what that feeling is like, because we have been conditioned to just consume information. And so for myself, I am a survivor of child sexual trauma. And the way that I coped with it my whole life, well, first as a child, I dove into the arts. I was someone who was always in the clouds, and I voraciously drew. And it wasn't until my high school years where I became so passionate about theater, because I loved being able to play the role of other bodies. I became so gifted and talented at putting on a show. And every time I looked on the television screen, I never saw anyone that looked like me. And so I had this dream of maybe one day I'll be an actress. And if I wasn't acting, I would be in my own cocoon drawing. And I remember in college, when I was studying theater, I was like, none of these scripts are reflective of my own personal experience. And so when I was introduced to the art of spoken word, it became this gateway of opportunities, because I could write my own stories. I could be the author of my own life. And from there, it became a passion of mine to also instill that in others. How is it that we can be the ones we needed growing up? And especially for me, because I didn't have models of what that looked like, being Asian American, being Southeast Asian, because most of the Asian Americans I saw on media were light-skinned or mixed with white. I had this belief that I wasn't beautiful and I wasn't worthy. And so much of that was channeled through actually anger. I was a very angry person, but it was also because that's what I thought I was supposed to be. I thought that my anger was righteous and it was valid. And granted, it was, but I didn't realize how much it was consuming me. And so I feel like so many of us go into this work of social change and social justice with a fire in our belly, and we don't always know what it's like to cultivate that into a healthy manner. And so I'm very grateful that I was able to channel so much of that through the arts. But in relation to storytelling, I didn't realize how much I was hurting myself by believing that I wasn't worthy or that I was still a victim. And granted, everybody has their process. And I brought that into my work, and it's still there today. But for me, it's like this healthy anger that I now get to use as fuel in order to transmute like a phoenix into something that's positive and productive. So I invite everybody to go through that fire so that they can feel more joy in their lives. But just so many of us get stagnant in that sadness. And so working in domestic violence, I didn't realize at that time that I was an empath, and that so many people who come into this work are also highly sensitive beings. And actually, I believe we're all highly sensitive. It's just so many of us have forgotten along the way. And so I remember witnessing everybody around me just getting sick or experiencing compassion fatigue. And the reason why I was freed was because I was so vocal about certain issues. Like, it's more than just domestic violence. We have to look at the root causes of poverty, classism, racism. And I also didn't feel like we needed to be collaborating with the police that perpetuated so much violence in our communities.
How much of your healing journey would you say was through the process of sharing it? And for other people who might have experienced trauma or difficulty growing up, like what, in terms of sharing or healing, what are your thoughts on that? Like when to share, and how has your journey been with that? And how was it with your healing?
Yeah, so I want to go back to Saturn return.
Okay.
So the time I was freed, well, prior to that experience, I actually organized a sister circle for myself when I was turning 27. And I gathered a group of sisters from their early 20s all the way into their late 50s. And it was about 30 of us. And I just shared with folks, hey, I'm about to enter my Saturn. And most people had never even heard of what that was. But when I explained it based off of something that I found on Google, everybody who was in their late 20s and early 30s was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I'm going through. And folks who were beyond that were like, oh yes, I remember that time. And so I wanted to create my own rites of passage and also honor those who were older than me, to recognize that they were either elders or elders in the making. And it is something that we get to reclaim, this identity of being an elder, and what wisdom can they share with us so that we recognize whatever turmoil we're experiencing as we're approaching our Saturn, which is between the ages of 28 to 31, 33-ish, is normal. And otherwise, so many of us will isolate ourselves or feel like we're not where we're supposed to be. So as a result of that experience, I went into my Saturn recognizing that whatever disruption will enter into my life is meant to serve as medicine. So when I was liberated from my job, I just remember driving home thinking to myself, like, oh, this is a part of the transition, because I was about to turn 29.
Yeah.
And there was a part of me that was angry, but a larger part of me that was like, wow, I get to start with a clean slate. And what are the new stories I am going to bring into my life?
Mm-hmm.
But before that happened, I got incredibly sick. I experienced this pain between my hips in my reproductive system. This biggest pain I've ever felt, to the point where I couldn't even get out of bed. And I felt like such a fraud, because that weekend was supposed to be the final of my yoga teacher training. And I was also becoming a yoni steaming apprentice. And I remember calling one of my mentors, feeling like I was not meant for this work, even though I was in pain. Who am I to be a healer when I'm feeling so sick right now? And I refused to go to the hospital. And what Marcia Lopez said to me, and she runs a business called True Woman's Healing, and she was one of our instructors in the yoni steaming program. She said, June, we are not here to work against these systems, these hospital systems. We're here to work alongside them. Go and see a doctor, because they save lives. And so my insurance was funky, but I ended up having to call the Capitol and got on Medi-Cal at that time. And when I finally was able to see a doctor, I got tested, and she said, we can't find anything wrong with you. Whatever's happening to you, it will pass. And I just remember thinking, okay, I just went through all these obstacles to get checked up, and you're telling me that there's nothing wrong with me. But she was right. Within a week later, all of my symptoms just disappeared. And going back to my yoga teaching, and the reason why I got into yoga was to work with survivors of sexual trauma at my job at the time. But now I was kind of on my own, and I recognized that so much of that work was for me. I realized that my root chakra was disrupted, and the way that it manifested physiologically in my body was through that pain, through this swelling in my hips. And after that, I recognized that I had been carrying the stories of the survivors I was working with. And also in that work, so much of my own stuff as a child was resurfacing. And I say hips, but let's just be honest. It was it was my yoni. It was, I say, and I think this is a safe place to say, right? It was my vagina that was in pain and was inflamed. And I think that we need to normalize these conversations, because I know that there's so many women who are experiencing reproductive challenges and pain in that area because of trauma that has not been addressed. And so much of my healing after that actually started at a pole dancing studio, because within a month I was like, I can't stay at home. I can't be in bed sulking in my own sadness. What is something polar opposite of what it is I did before that I can walk into now? And I remember walking into this pole dance studio, not even going in for pole. I went in for bar, but I fell in love with the space and with these women, and how we can be wearing barely anything, and yet we are celebrating each other. We are moving our hips unapologetically. And it was my very first time being surrounded by other women entrepreneurs. And so many of them, as I started to get to know them more, were also survivors themselves. And yet they never picked up, well, maybe they did, but a lot of them didn't have to go through a rape crisis hotline in order to find safety and peace. And granted, those services are there for a reason. But I remember when I was working in that field, something was missing. And what it was this opportunity to invite the survivors I was talking with to reclaim their bodies, reclaim their sensuality. But I couldn't do that within that system. It could only be done outside of it.
Yeah.
So through that process, through my year being there, I realized that there's so much liberation that happens when women are able to reclaim that sensuality.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. I mean, bringing it back into the body and into the, the yoga and the somatics and moving your hips, and so much healing is possible when we go into those spaces.
And it took me almost 30 years to get there.
Yeah.
So for the first time, I could finally say, wow, I love my body. Thank you for all the pain that you put me through, because it was your way of protecting me, and it was your way of asking me to pay attention. Yes. And so many of us are just beating up our bodies for this experience, when really it's the body's way of saying, slow down. I love you. Listen to me. And that's what I witnessed in retrospect, looking at the organizing work that I did in my 20s, whether it was like out on the streets or even within the nonprofit. I see it over and over again. People who are tired and burnt out and disconnected from their bodies, because I feel like so much of it is rooted in colonization. We've been robbed of that experience. And so I feel like in my adult years, I'm unlearning. This is a process of unlearning. And I'm so grateful for the adversities that have served as these lessons in my life today.
Yeah. And now you're sharing these stories in your spoken word on stages, in workshops. Can you tell us a little bit of how you're helping women today, what that looks like?
Yeah, so I feel like the way my work has shifted from facilitating workshops is now I bring in that somatic piece. And I work with all genders, but I especially love working with women, because as people come to me seeking confidence in how is it they can speak their truth and tell their story, it's so much more than just public speaking, right? And I also do assistant coaching with one of my mentors, Lisa Nichols, who's one of the top motivational speakers in the world. And now whenever I'm coaching people in speaking, I just don't, I'm just not studying their words. I'm studying their body. How is it that they're carrying themselves? And are they making speaking and their own stories of full body experience. And so the way that I see my place in the world of storytelling and public speaking is bringing in the somatics piece. And so one of the most recent group programs that I just completed took my clients through the chakra system. And I know that that's something that you bring a lot of in your work. But what I learned in the process is, as we started with the root, we started with I belong, right? Because so many of us walk into these spaces feeling like we don't belong. And so then we don't take up space. And so that for me is where it all begins, recognizing that no matter where we're at, we absolutely belong, even if other people are making us feel like we don't. By us inserting ourselves in these spaces where we have been made to feel like we're not supposed to be there, that is a radical act. For example, I can go into a space today, like a studio with a yoga studio with like all white people. Whereas before I would have been highly triggered by it. But today I recognize, no, this is a practice for me to reclaim my body, and other people's opinions of me or what I think of me don't matter in this moment. Whether it's a yoga studio or whether it's in a corporate environment, you belong. And then after that, we went into the sacral chakra, right? Which we know is where our sensuality and our creativity is stored. And what happened in that process was that every single one of my clients, who happened to all be women of color in this cohort, started resurfacing old stories of sexual trauma that a lot of them didn't even realize was there. And I had clients who were like sending letters to their former abusers of just like, I need to do this for myself. I'm letting this go. I need to address the harm that happened and how this has affected me, but I am my own being now. And it was just breakthrough after breakthrough started happening, specifically after that particular module of talking about our sacral chakra. And I had several clients who were like, I came into this group hoping to become confident as a speaker, but I didn't realize how much healing was going to happen for me just being able to speak my truth. And so much of my work is about connecting the sacral chakra to the throat chakra. You want to be able to break through your throat chakra. You want to be able to speak your truth. We're going to have to go into those deep places that we haven't visited in a long time. And are you willing to go there? And truth be told, not a lot of clients are willing to go to those places. They just want to be able to be a confident speaker. Yeah. And I'm not going to be the coach for them, because for me, this work is deep, radical healing work.
Yes. Yes. And creating those safe spaces is like where the healing happens and where we can start to unpack some of those stories and come into our greater empowerment. I as well, I'm happen to be leading a group right now. It's like 8 women in a Reclaim Your Voice type group. And the very first session, I decided to bring in healing unresolved memories, because it's like, whether that be, you try out for the choir in 5th grade and someone shuts you down or whatever happens that could be related to the voice. But I was actually surprised too of just how much abuse stories came up in that space of just people starting to share of just the times they got shut down, or emotional abuse, or other kinds of abuse from just childhood things, the unworthiness, that the beliefs that are formed at that time that really shut us down in our throat chakra and in our sense of safety and our ability and willingness to speak up. And so like getting to see these women, like creating a safe space for that. Because I was part of Toastmasters for 2 years, which is wonderful. And like, there's no room for that. It's very much just like, get up there and do it. And, no one's going to ask you how it felt or any of that. It's just, but, I wanted to create a space, and it's just women, and there's a lot of safety, and there's a lot of partner work, and them having the space to start to share some of those stories that maybe they've never even told before.
Yeah, I've never attended a Toastmasters gathering because I have this fear that I'm going to be conditioned with more information when I feel like I'm just getting comfortable in my body. I don't want I don't want just like critique right now. And yes, that's why for me, I want to be able to provide, in addition to safe spaces, brave spaces, where we feel like we don't have to walk on eggshells, being able to have these vulnerable conversations and recognizing that we may mess up, but can we be partners in each other's liberations? Because I do workshops for organizations as well, specifically nonprofit organizations that are rooted in social change. And again, I'm able to do that because I was able to experience what it was like on the inside. And I recognize my role as this person who is able to come in and hold this space, because I'm not the one that's holding in all of this tension in my body from doing the frontline work. I feel like we all have our place. And whenever I bring in community agreements, that's one of the things I like to challenge, because in a lot of spaces, we'll talk about safe spaces, but can we get comfortable with discomfort? Let's start there. But also, can we see feedback as a gift? We're all in this together. And we often lose sight of the bigger purpose of our work because of these interpersonal relationships where there's sometimes tension. And I am somebody who is extremely passionate about systemic change, but where I'm at now in my life is recognizing that when we're able to cultivate our own inner resilience, that alone will leak out into our interpersonal relationships and eventually to the systems. But most importantly, as you were sharing about the work you're doing with other women around being able to tap into those unresolved traumas and memories and being able to heal our throat chakra, it's so tied to intergenerational healing, because a lot of the silence is something that has been passed down from our matriarchal lineage or from the women we've seen around us. So we're not just doing this for ourselves. We're doing this for our past generations and the ones to come.
Yes. Yes. And I even would add past lives, and like all of the women thousands of years ago and even more recently that have carried the wound of, like, if I were to really be a powerful magical being and to stand in my voice, that I would be attacked or killed or something terrible would happen. I think a lot of us carry that in our DNA, whether, I think probably many of us have that in our ancestry, but even beyond that, just like having lived it ourselves in other lifetimes.
Absolutely.
This really deep-rooted fear. And I like to think that what is part of the healing is that sisterhood, is the women coming together to see and witness and celebrate and support each other.
Yeah, because we've been so conditioned to tear each other down.
Yeah.
And I have this one piece that I wrote like over 10 years ago, which is called The Body of a Woman. And whenever I share that piece, people think that maybe I'm a lesbian, right? And it's like, the point is, why can't I celebrate the body of other women without being sexualized about it, right? I love women. I absolutely love women and how beautiful we carry ourselves despite how much society has beaten us up to look a certain way. So yes, like, how is it that we can create this culture of collaboration over competition because we're in this together?
Yeah. Can you tell us about just your journey with fear, imposter syndrome, self-doubt, all the things, and how, and if I imagine there are people out there listening that are like, well, I want to move beyond my fears. I want to share my story, but all of this stuff comes up around like, who are you to do this? Or, maybe you'll just fail, or maybe you'll just make a mistake. Like, how do you deal with those voices?
Oh, those voices never, ever go away. Let me tell you, every single time I'm getting ready to send out another newsletter, it's just like, I'm like, oh, I don't want to send this. I'm going to get so many unsubscribers because they're going to judge me, or they're going to think that I'm weird. And so it still comes up every single time I put up a post right before I go on stage. Mm-hmm. And the way that I have come to reframe how is it I put myself out there is that, you know what? I don't come for everybody. I come for somebody. And those who drop out, that's okay. They no longer need to be a part of this experience, and may they find whatever it is they need. But what's most important for me is that there is someone out there, at least one person, who will find some sort of healing with whatever it is I have to say. So I'll just focus on that. And then every single time I'll put out a newsletter or I'll put out a vulnerable post, I'll get these messages. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Because I think for a lot of us as entrepreneurs, we're like, maybe nobody's listening. Maybe nobody cares what it is I have to produce. Yeah. So I feel like stepping on this path specifically of entrepreneurship has been the greatest teacher of resilience. Mm-hmm. Because I don't have anybody giving me a report telling me how is it I'm doing, right? The way that I collect evidence is through the breakthroughs people are receiving, either as a result of working with me or from being able to read my content. And let that be enough. Let my success be the result of the impact I'm making in this world. And it's not just about me. It is about me, but it's not about me. Mm-hmm. It's about this ripple effect of healing and transmutation I would love to see occur, because too many of us are hurting inside. Too many of us feel like we're not good enough. And too many of us are stuck, are stagnant in our old stories. And I feel like in my work, if we can first work with the stories that we're telling ourselves, then we can recreate new realities.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I can share too that I have those things come up as well. And yeah, I think especially as a lot of women out there, at least who listen to this podcast, would maybe describe themselves as more sensitive. And it can be really intense to be sharing ourselves or making those posts or sending those newsletters or doing the live or whatever it is. And those voices come up for sure. And it's also really helped me to connect with like those thank yous that come in, and you never know, like for every like one person who actually takes the time to send you a message and be like, that thing you shared, like is really, there are probably so many more people who are receiving that wisdom without even saying anything. And to think of that and that ripple effect and that impact is so empowering to keep going.
Mm-hmm. And also, one of the things I struggle with is, oh, am I just doing this work so that I can get compliments and attention from other people, right? Because that's not healthy either. Yeah. So I always go back to the little girl in me, the one who looked at the TV and didn't see anyone that looked like her, the one who felt so disconnected from her body because it was her innocence was robbed from her at such a young age. And I genuinely did not have any role models to look up to. And so today I get to look back at that little girl and be like, it's going to be okay. I'm here now. Yeah. So I feel like a lot of the work that I'm doing, and for anybody who chooses to work with someone like me or you, is about rescuing that inner child and letting her know that she's safe and she can come home now. She can play.
Yes. Yeah. Hold her hand, bring her on the journey.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, let's see. I wanted to ask you just about this question with your business name and its relationship to numerology. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I don't know much about numerology, but I do have a friend in LA, Diana, who facilitated this workshop on numerology and the way it connects to our business. So my business name is still registered as Green Tara Guidance. And I only learned about Green Tara when I went on this meditation retreat for people of color. And growing up as a Buddhist, I just saw male monks my whole life.
Mm.
And the female monks were the ones who were, well, the nuns who were the ones who were quiet and reserved. And so I just feel like we put men on such a high pedestal of being these spiritual teachers that I didn't have many examples of women who were doing this work. And so when I learned about Green Tara, who is one of the only female deities within Buddhism that is recognized, and she's also not Kuan Yin, who is like has this white pearly skin, right? And that's another thing. It's like all these people we uphold as spiritual teachers are like very, very light skinned.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to learn about Green Tara Guidance, how she was neither black nor white, and how she is the bodhisattva of liberation, who is not just stepping off of this giant lotus as a divine feminine being, but as someone who unapologetically channels this healthy anger to say, stop messing up. Right? Like that's what I see. The image of her is like, what I read about her is that like she is known to trigger people. Like she will not be that passive person who says like, oh, everything's going to be okay. Like you're fine. She will scare you into your truth. And I was like, that is who I want to embody. So that's where Green Tara Guidance came in. And I'm known to trigger people, but I'd like to think that triggers are just the body's way of saying, oh, this is an area that still needs to be healed. But with that being said, Green Tara Guidance's number, I think it's number 9, was like the nurturer. And these past couple of months, I'm like, I don't want to be the nurturer anymore. And so my business is now transitioning fully into your story medicine, which was inspired by my very first online summit, Your Story Medicine. But the number that corresponds with Your Story Medicine, what was it? It's like, was it 5? Regardless, the number that it represents is one of structure and strategy. And I feel like my whole life I've been a free spirit. I'm still a free spirit. Those were actually the last words of my boss before she liberated me, which is, you're a free spirit, go and be free now, which I took as a slap in the face at the time. But now I'm like, oh, I am. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I am interested in what it looks like to integrate that strategy into my business and for those around me.
Yes.
Yeah. So how should we ground ourselves?
And that sounds like, it sounds a little bit like Saturn energy, which is like structure and building and like
the foundation.
Yeah. Foundation and containment and routine and like, creating structures, which, I love
moving at least for me, moving from ether to earth, grounding myself in this energy.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I love numerology too. I recently learned like if you add up the numbers of the house, like where you live, and you get that number and each of the numbers correspond to like a different planet, you can learn about the energy of like the land you live on or the home you live on or things like that.
Oh my goodness. That'll be the next level for me. And what's so great about the way she brings in branding and marketing is that she will create a talisman for you. So what if we can view our logos as talismans?
Wow.
The things that will attract the people who are praying to work with someone like us, and for us to also recognize that marketing is magic.
Yeah.
We are doing this work to call in the folks who are willing to be partners in their liberation with us.
Yes. Yeah, it's so energetic of just like, and I like to think when we make that effort and we put the energy out and we do those things that scare us and all of that, it's like energy comes back, whether it comes back in the form of clients or some people like finding us, new people, or whatever it is. It's like you may put energy out in one direction and it may come back in a totally different direction, but it's still like that reciprocity and exchange.
Yeah. And even that has been a huge healing relationship for myself, and recognizing that money is just energy. I'm still on that journey today, but I think before, when I was working in nonprofit and also doing community organizing, I was just so adverse to money. It's evil. If I get money, I'm going to become a greedy person. I'm going to be like Trump. But today, I'm just so grateful to have examples of people in my life who are financially abundant and are good people. They don't really care to have a lot of money in their bank account. It's just a way of being able to give back to their communities. And that's what I would love for myself, to be able to be that person at a nonprofit gala who raises their hand to say, I will drop $10,000 for this cause. I remember when I was working at those galas, I was so surprised by how much money people had. And here I was getting paid minimum wage, working like 60 hours a week. And we were just showering them with gratitude. And not saying that that's what I want, but it's like, I recognize that a lot of these people who were able to contribute a lot were entrepreneurs, were people who were able to cultivate their own resources. And so for me, a big reframing is, how is it that I can be that asset that I once thought was lacking in my own community?
Yeah.
And how is it that I can empower others to also tap into their own resources? Like, we may lack resources, but especially for immigrants, folks of colors, and refugees. Like, even though folks may lack resources, we are so resourceful. If you see the way folks are able to build these gardens with a small plot of land, these seeds that were not meant to survive on this soil. I love walking around these neighborhoods in Long Beach, in Cambodia town, seeing dragon fruit and other plants that really are not meant to thrive here. And yet these elders are able to cultivate them and bring them life and nourish themselves with these organic fruits and vegetables, right? But really, it's just a part of their lives. And so I feel like each of us are these seeds, right? Like, each of us are these seeds who are waiting to sprout from our shells. And over again, society will try to bury us, but we will rise. So let's tap into that power.
So beautiful. Can you tell us just what's coming up in your business?
Yeah, so I did share a little bit about my business name, Your Story Medicine, which was birthed from my first online summit that happened a couple months ago. And the tagline was how to move from trauma to resilience. And I was at a time in my life where I was learning how to move from my own trauma to resilience. And if you go to yourstorymedicine.com, you will either see the old lineup or the upcoming lineup. But the old lineup was folks who were experts in trauma and healing and plant medicine. And they taught me, how is it that I can transmute my own pain into personal power? And so, to be entirely honest, after that summit, I built a list of like 1,200 people, and I got so scared of all these people. Like, I don't know any of you. I don't want to send out a newsletter. I don't want to sell you anything. Most because I realized that a lot of the discovery calls I was getting on felt like I was on rape crisis hotline all over again. And I'm like, no, how is it that I can be that person who is not the expert on trauma, but is the one who is willing to help you create that new narrative for your life. Yeah. But I cannot do that work for you. You have to meet me halfway. So the next phase of my new online summit is Your Story Medicine, How to Speak Your Truth, Lead Heart-Centered Workshops, and Become the Author of Your Life. So I will be inviting experts who are authors and speakers and healers, workshop facilitators, but also I feel like a lot of us come into this work of entrepreneurship because of the traumas we've experienced, but we've been able to bounce back and are being resilient enough to create the lives that we wished we had maybe 5-10 years ago, but recognizing that despite all that it is we've been through, our identities, our traumas do not have to define the trajectory of our life. We get to create that. So yes, I'm all about how is it that we can not only recognize our traumas, but transmute them. Transmutation is the key. So that is what I am manifesting next. And to look out for anyone who is willing to walk alongside me on this journey.
Yes. That's so great. So needed. I mean, creating the new story, rising, yes, acknowledging, loving, honoring all the parts of ourselves that have been hurt, but not staying there. Being like, what can this teach me? What can I create from this? How can I inspire others? What is the new story, the new life that I am creating?
And then everybody will talk about how, yes, telling our story can be healing, is a form of liberation. But I feel like if you're going to tell your story, if you're going to tell that dark side of your life, recognize that you also have a responsibility in making sure that whoever's listening to your story is going to leave feeling empowered. And granted, I cannot force that onto anyone because some people will say, like, how dare you tell me how to tell my story? But I've been in way too many situations where people will use the stage as a form of therapy. And that can be harmful, especially if you are telling a story, for example, of sexual trauma. And how many people are you triggering in the audience who may have never, ever had a space to address their own stuff? And I've seen people bolt out of the room and they're not able to recover because they don't know where the resources are afterward. So that's why for me, especially as I walk clients through this process of storytelling and public speaking, how is it that you can tell your story from an empowered place? And it doesn't mean that you have to be fully healed, but how is it that you can share with us you are diligently doing the work to heal yourself? And I'll be able to see just by the way you are standing whether or not you are doing the work. And if you're still in that story, it's okay. We'll walk out of it together.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And where can people find the, where to find the summit and the speakers and conversations?
Yeah. Simple. So just go to yourstorymedicine.com and I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to see how is it that I could also help you shape your own narrative, because I truly feel like everybody has a story that can serve as someone else's medicine. Yeah. So let's find that story and recognize that everybody is a healer, right?
Yes.
Everybody is an empath too. A lot of us have just forgotten about it.
Yes.
let's come back to remembering.
Yes. And any last words or messages you want to leave our listeners with before I close this conversation with a short prayer?
That you absolutely belong. And wherever it is you are in your life right now, recognize it is exactly where you need to be. Even if you feel like you are in the deepest valleys, I'm so excited to hear the stories that are going to be birthed as a result of this experience.
Yeah. So I'll just invite us to breathe that in. And coming back into the space of the heart. Taking any of the gems, the wisdom, the insights that have landed with you today. Just holding those with you. Taking them with you as your source of empowerment out into your day and out into your lives, and allow that to ripple out to the people around you, just through your embodiment, through your actions, through your words. Knowing that you belong, your story is important, it's medicine for all the people who may need it, and that you are so capable of creating a new story in your life. So I will bow. Thank you to Jumakae for her beautiful stories and wisdom, and to everyone listening for showing up, doing the work for yourself in your own life. Namaste.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to our show today. We would love to hear what you think. Take a moment to hop on over to iTunes and leave us a review. We'd be so grateful to receive it. Until next time, namaste.